keeps us focused. And so welcome to all of you for this, I think it's the third in the session of the Leadership Lab that PJ has set up about navigating change, collaboration, and leading inclusively. I think these run every Wednesday for the next 13 weeks at midday. And there you go. I am clearly not PJ. I don't have the temerity to wear pink jeans. I'd never do that. But my name is Gavin Russell. I have worked quite a lot with PJ over the last few years. My background is actually in organizational culture. So I've 25 years within the organizational culture space, or within talent space, most of that within organizational culture. I run and own a company called Peppermoth, and we just do organizational culture. And as I said, I've worked with PJ on a number of different projects, and he's asked me to sort of step in today just to sort of facilitate the debate, not sort of necessarily define the agenda, but facilitate it so everyone's got an opportunity to talk and discuss one of the key issues that he wants to talk about, or he's focused on, which is about strategy. So I think this is what happened last time out. And frequent flyers will have to correct me if I'm wrong. Neil, this is the bit of background. So this is the third in 13 sessions that are running every Wednesday. And today is specifically talking about strategy. And last time out, it was about vision. And you can see what was discussed there. But today we're going to shift that a little bit, and we're going to be talking really just only about two core questions. And as I said, I'm going to facilitate, but I'm going to get you guys to do the talking as opposed to me jabbering on. So let's just crack into the first question, which I think is probably the most important from a leadership perspective, is what everyone understands by strategic leadership. And in the context there, I'm referring to the difference between normal leadership. So what's the difference between normal leadership and strategic leadership, really? So does anyone want to kick us off? Oh, so smiles and grins going on.
Yeah, I will.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Davina.
So I think it's being more aware and more mindful of driving your company and your mission forward with a view to always keeping an eye on the purpose and, you know, your kind of raison d'etre, and being guided by that to move your company and mission forward and your people.
Right. Brilliant. Anyone else want to add to that? I think that's a great definition, but anyone else want to add to it?
I can come and go if you want.
Please.
Well, I've always seen it as a little bit different. Yeah, obviously the vision was last week. I missed that one, but a vision statement is something a bit more ethereal, a bit more sort of North Star. Strategic leadership to me seems a bit more around finding your way through that to that point in a longer view, rather than getting deep into the minutiae of how a business operates and runs. But with the challenges of running a small or medium-sized business, that's quite difficult. But maybe sitting on the bridge of the ship rather than stoking the coal in the engine room. But I'm never sure what strategic leadership really means. To be honest, that's why I jumped on this call, because I think it's something that perhaps we do, but don't know why we do it or how we do it, and maybe define. Yeah.
Well, I think you're both right, actually, based upon my experience. And I'm never going to pretend. As I said before, I'm not a leadership expert. I do specialize within the culture space. But for me, the bit about strategic leadership as opposed to regular leadership is that it's been able to operate in environments that are all about uncertainty and change, and being able to sort of keep your eyes on the prize, but being able to adjust as you go along. So it's less about the as you said, Raoul, it's about the sort of stoking or putting fuel on the furnace. It's much more about being able to map the difference between the big picture of what you're trying to achieve, but also the reality of what today throws up. And I think that goes on to our next topic, or the next question I wanted to raise with you around directional strategy. We'll come to that.
Oh, before we move on, I mean, just I mean, there are the numerous ways in which you could sort of articulate strategic leadership, but I would say, my 2 cents is that it's about really about value creation. So it moves out of that immediacy of day-to-day kind of business operations and business functions into being able to identify ways in which you can create value, right? So where there are unlocked, unexplored sort of value areas within your business, how you can mobilize your business, the people, the products, the capacity within the business to become greater than the sum of its parts. So whether that's perspective wise, right, thinking numerous years ahead, or breadth of the business in terms of mobilizing other players, partners, supporters in your sector. But it's just being, it's having a sort of an eye for value creation is certainly my take on it.
Absolutely, and I think that's right. I'll play devil's advocate here a little bit for everyone here. What about when there's a crisis? And for instance, a new competitor hoves into view, or a new bit of technology disrupts your marketplace, not just your business, but your marketplace. What's the role of strategic leadership in that context?
I think that's probably where Neil's coming from, really. To me, it's about seeing opportunities that perhaps are not apparent to those who are in the business. And when you see the iceberg coming, is making sure you've already made the diversion sign, or you've already taken a strategic view of, yes, you knew it was going to happen, but however, you are going to face it in this way, or you're going to develop a new product, or whatever your field is. But I think that's how I see strategic leadership, is seeing opportunities and threats, but also having the ability to do something about them. There's lots of people who do a SWOT analysis, but not necessarily know what to do with the analysis. It tells them there's a problem coming. So I think the strategic part is, when you're leading a business, is to see opportunities, see the doors that are opening, and also the ones that are possibly closing, but action it, do something about it. Yeah. That's how I see it. Yeah.
Do you, just by that rationale, Raoul, do you still need a quote unquote a North Star to navigate by, so you know what direction you should be traveling in when those new opportunities come up?
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
I see you nodding.
Yeah, I would say so, because I mean, lots of nautical analogies, but I mean, getting blown off course, but you still need to tack. You tack across to get the same direction. So, I think, yes, you otherwise you do lose sight. I mean, obviously, COVID is a classic example where you could easily lose sight of what your purpose in the business was, whilst you're trying to navigate your way through a complete disaster. So, but if that is still your guiding principle, I think you get through it. But you may not get through it in the way that if you wrote a business plan 5-10 years ago, you would never have written it. It would never be the way that the business develops. But it doesn't mean your goal, your vision is incorrect. It's just the journey to it is somewhat different.
Absolutely. So that's quite a nice segue, actually, to the next slide. Well, actually, before we get there, I'm going to throw some different questions out that PJ and I discussed yesterday, and just see if this sort of shifts some of the thinking here, or evolves, I should say, some of the thinking. So, oops. Is anyone aware of Peter Drucker's really basic model, which is around the relationship between leadership, strategy, and culture? So I see a few nods there. And we've talked about, I suppose, the ability to navigate and to be able to react to real life situations. What's the view on culture within this context? What's the view on what role that plays in strategic leadership?
That's intrinsic to it. I mean, your culture and your people are everything. And nowadays, more and more companies, are championing their people. Gone are the kind of HR departments of old. It's all about people, culture, fostering positive environments. You're only going to get to your end mission. If you're leading a company, whether it's your own or someone else's, you can have, with all the vision and everything in the world, you're not going to achieve anything without the right people who have the right mindset. So culture is everything to fostering positive kind of behaviors to achieve any end goal, whatever that may be, and to kind of carry through on the strategy, and then to pivot as well. If you've got the right culture, you know, as somebody just said, you've got to be able to pivot. You've got your North Star, your guiding principles, your overall aim, but you need to be able to kind of move with the time. So unless you've got the right culture, you're not going to be able to do that effectively.
Absolutely. Clearly, you're obviously preaching to the converted here, because I believe that too. But interested to hear what other people think about that. And particularly, if you had to draw an arrow on this particular diagram, would it be pointing from culture to strategy, or from strategy to culture, or both?
It's a, you know, the classic one is this kind of culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? I don't know where that came from now. It might have been an idea.
Peter Drucker.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I'd agree. I think, you know, if you had to choose or pick, you know, having the right culture, you know, I think allows you to, again, build value, right? However you define value. But if you choose the wrong strategy, that can crush culture, right? If you you know, you have your workforce, employees orientated in such a way, maybe they're go-getters, maybe they want to go and change the world, maybe they're mission orientated, but if you've got a crap strategy, right, you're gonna damage that culture. I haven't quite thought it through. It just occurred to me in terms of the kind of direction of those two triangles. But no, I think very few people would argue that culture isn't important and that a good strategy is more important. Maybe in a SaaS world, maybe in a digital world, maybe in an AI world, right? That's not the case, because you probably just got less cultural aspects to concern yourself with. But get strategy wrong, right, and it can, you know, degrade, right, the other elements.
Okay. Raoul, do you want to come in on that? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm just wondering which way the arrow goes. I mean, I think your culture, as Davina said, is absolutely vital to build a business. If you've got your culture wrong, it doesn't really matter how good your strategy is. I think it will not become the strategy that you won't be able to implement it, basically. Whether it's the culture that supports the strategy or the strategy, I think it's culture that supports the strategy. I think because if you're building a business that's got a clear goal, vision, strategy, you tend to, hopefully, you recruit people who believe that vision. Therefore, the culture of the people within the business should be aligned to the vision and the strategy, which then helps the culture grow. I would think that's the way it works. It can get destroyed by bad leadership, and you know, I've witnessed that in my own business, and it can be also blown a little bit left and right when things go a bit difficult. But I think that's the way it should work in a theoretical sense. How it works day to day, and the vagaries of everyone's personal opinion, and trying to navigate your way through running a business and keep everyone happy. I'm not sure, but I think that's the way I would hope that would work. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, and you raised a really good point there, which is the play back into leadership, though, because they're in this symbiotic relationship. All three of these things impact each other, and I'd argue maybe that they impact each other in different orders of magnitude at different times, depending on the inflection point of your business, depending on the outside factors that are disrupting or enabling your organization. So it's not black and white or black and orange, as PJ's done here. It's not as straightforward as this model might suggest, but the model's really good to simplify it. And I do want to sort of focus back onto the leadership bit here, because I think that's really important when it comes to culture enabling strategy, or strategy enabling culture. What is the role of leaders in that sense? And I want to throw out a couple of bits of data at you that I've used in my conversations with my clients beforehand. Not too much here, I promise. This was from a study that was done by the London School of Economics, and the study was called Productivity Puzzles, and it was done in 2017. and it was a longitudinal piece of research by the LSE on organizations between 1955 and 2010. So over a 65-year period. Have I got my maths right there? No, 55-year period. Goodness me, it's been long in the day. So a 55-year period. And over that time, they analyzed the increase in business complexity had gone up by 6 times. So as organizations, and this is obviously really the digital world kicking in, business complexity had gone up 6 times. But organizational complicatedness, as in the compliance, the rules, the policies, the infrastructure that organizations put in place to manage complexity had gone up 35 times. So that, for example, a couple of the data that I've got here, number of approvals that managers need to make a decision had gone up to 7. 40% of management time spent on report writing, and 30 to 60% of managers' time was spent in meetings. So suddenly these leaders who are supposed to be strategic are being pulled away from that, and dramatically pulled away from that. This next set of data is from a different source, which is from MindGym. And as a result of the data I've just shared with you, 70% of leaders are overworked or stressed, 80% of time spent on activities they don't feel adds value, and 2/3 of them wish they didn't actually have to lead people. So I wanted to throw that to this group and ask, how does that impact strategic leadership if the leaders themselves don't feel they've got or they're overwhelmed with the day-to-day to stop them actually focusing on the strategic imperative? Anyone want to take that?
They're just making reactive decisions, I guess. And, you're reacting you're not proactively managing where the business is going, etc. And yes. So for me,
it's hard to be strategic.
Yeah, you just can't. And it's a different mindset. If you're fighting fires all the time, you can't. You need to carve out that space to think longer term. So I mean, this is something we see all the time. All the time, to be fair.
It seems to be the perennial issue that when I speak to any leader, it's just that there's no lack of positive intent. There's no lack of intellectual capability. There's no lack of motivational purpose. It's time, resources, and effort that seems to be in shorter supply. Does that play out, Davina, Neil, Raoul? Does that play out for you? Does that resonate, or is your experience quite different?
No, it totally resonates, and I think you see it as the bigger the organisation becomes. I think this gets blown even higher or greater degree, because I mean, I looked at that and thought NHS. No one's being a nurse anymore. They're all filling out forms, and I think every business, you get to a certain level. I don't know what it is about its KPIs or its management structures or its things that you sort of build factors in. What was that one? 6 times more complex and 35 more organisational complexity. Yeah, you do, and some of that's regulatory, and some of that is because you're told to by government or by regulatory authorities, but a lot of it is internal. A lot of it is.
I come from an HR background, and it's HR who does a huge amount of that bureaucracy.
It's horrendous, and we've had a bit of a strip out of those sort of activities to try to flatten, instead of having a very sort of hierarchical organisational structure, make it a bit more. I know they call it a donut structure now, a bit more collegiate, I suppose, to try to get away from this. Well, you sign, I sign, he signs, she signs. It goes. It was just becoming ludicrous. And when you actually analyse where the benefit is, there was no benefit to the business. It was just administration, and therefore you have jobs created for administration that have no value adding to the business. And then you've got another, and everyone needs an assistant, and everyone needs and it explodes. And I think there's a problem, and I don't quite know what the solution is, because if the leader gets sucked into administering day in, day out to that level of minutiae,
bureaucratic bullshit. I mean, it really is what it is.
Your head's, you've got no space for it. You can't run a business and get involved with everything, but you also don't want to give your middle management all the shit that you used to deal with. they have the same problem. So,
and are probably less capable of dealing with it effectively than you are, for no fault of their own, apart from experience or knowledge of the big picture.
Yeah, and I think that is the problem with smaller entrepreneurial businesses. Because we spin lots of plates, you assume everyone else can spin them all, and in fact, they can't. And in fact, you get so much burnout and problems. So, yeah, I wish I knew what the answer was, but I think we've got to try and simplify how we do things. That's very easy to say, not so easy to do.
So, you're absolutely right, and the answer, I think. I'm not going to pretend that there is a magic answer at all. PJ is obviously, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, there's a view on something called directional strategies, which I want to sort of talk about a little bit more. But back to that Drucker triangle, which is it's somewhere between that oscillating sort of give and take between leadership, strategy, and culture. That somewhere between those 3 points, there's an answer. But that's obviously constantly evolving and constantly shifting depending on external market conditions and internal sort of company conditions. You know, people leave, people join, you're fast growth, you're in redundancy or shrinking. You know, all of these things have a clear economic, commercial impact, as well as an emotional impact on people and their ability to perform. But look, I can warble on that for hours, and we've only got 14 minutes left. So let me just raise this question then about directional strategies. And before I do that, is everyone clear about what a directional strategy is? Do we need a common definition, or is it familiar to all of you?
It'd be useful to have
a shaking the head from Raoul.
A definition would be good.
Yeah, definition.
Definitely.
Okay, so I use ChatGPT for this one, I'm afraid, because I have to admit that I didn't know this coming into today's conversation. So I'm going to read out here a quote, and this to me on the work that I do, or the research I did yesterday, was the clearest definition I could come up. So when conditions are volatile and the future is unclear, setting the right general direction is more important than setting a destination. So it's direction versus destination. Then as conditions evolve, greater clarity emerges, companies continually adjust their heading and pace. So rather than following a master plan, the strategic game is played out in a series of moves, each building on the last and the new situation it creates. So it's a bit like, the analogy that came to my mind when I read that was chess, right? You know you need to take their queen, but you don't know what their move is going to be. So don't have defined master plan on your next 30 moves. You just need to know your next move. And you need to know what's the greatest risk and what your vulnerabilities are. So that's how I understood directional strategies. Does that all make sense? That seems, I've got a few notes. Okay, great. So that's a good start. So I suppose the question seems fairly binary, but do we need that in today's world?
I think we probably need it more than ever. I mean, in some respects, that's interesting, because you tend to think you've got to have this great master plan, but actually the reality is, I mean, a 5-year plan is, pushing it 3 years, you might just about get away with it. Maybe this is the way things are moving so fast, and things are so unstable and so difficult to predict, that actually it's probably a better strategy than
having a 5-year strategy. Yeah.
I want to thank you. This is great. I haven't come across a directional strategy before, but I have 2 applications for this already. Because same with Raoul. Completely agree. I think we're possibly in the era of directional strategies. I don't know, we haven't met the rest of the team here, but I've spent 20 odd years in tech sector, last 4 years in Amazon. And, in Amazon, we were very specific about the kind of the client, the customer, the products, the product customer fit was paramount, right? And you can support that with a vision. But I think what you've outlined here is incredibly important, given all of the moving parts, right, of the kind of the economy as it stands today. So, yeah.
Great. Oh, I'm glad it's been helpful. I think one of the things that stood out for me, and as I said beforehand, I certainly wouldn't pretend to be an expert in this space, was that it's directional strategy is almost it's not to say you don't know what you're doing. There's a systematic approach or systematic process for dealing with the unfamiliar. And so there were 4 points that came up with certainly the research that I noticed, which was to have that sort of a directional strategy, you need an orientation. So you need to sort of define what it is you're trying to do, or define what your beliefs are, if you're going that far back. You need a compass heading and pace. How quickly, where you're actually heading for, but how quickly do you want to achieve it? And then you need to sort of have optimize your decisions, to paraphrase what I read, the robustness to avoid killers and seek out kickers. So you're coming up with a series of strategic stances, which are, what's vulnerable? Where are my vulnerabilities? So how does that influence my next decision? Or where are my opportunities? How does that influence my next decision? And it sounds almost like a playbook where, if things are going great, here are the things we should do, or here are the sort of the key objectives that we should try and hit. If things are going badly, this is what we've got to defend. And those directional strategies allow you to then play out or deal with the uncertainty and the unpredictability in a proactive way almost. I think that ties in as well to what PJ was talking about, which is his process. And I think that was when we talk about exact and what PJ focuses on. I think as we talked about, or as you would have talked about, whoever was there on the call last week, which is about envisaging the future. What is your place in the future? What's the vision which aligns people and resources? But I think what we're talking about here within this this side of strategic directions is, what's the gap you have to close, and what's the extract part of it, to be clear on the journey state and best use of resources. And it's actually trying to come up with that balance of not over planning but not under planning. And I think that's where his view is very much on that leadership side, and how important that is. So this is some of the data that he's talked about, which is around leadership. Developing leadership is incredibly important, but I think in this context, developing the ability to be strategic is incredibly important. And so bringing in this idea of the strategic leadership, or directional leadership, or directional strategy, I'll get the phrase right eventually, bringing this idea of directional strategy in, it's actually a really important skill to train up, because you can see that a lot of change initiatives, a lot of improvement doesn't work because people aren't necessarily on board with it. And again, interesting, just as I'm mindful of time, how does that resonate with you in terms of your leadership communities and your teams, where their ability to have that directional strategy, or to apply directional strategy?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. I mean, that second point on the right there, poor middle management costs the business 200, the economy 200 billion a year. Is that billion? Yeah.
Billion, yeah.
Yeah. I do think there is a real area where you struggle to get all levels of management and other parts of the business aligned to get projects moving and things you need to change. Because if you're looking properly in the business forward, you do need to change things, but actually people don't really want to change. And it doesn't matter. It only really want to change when you tell them the shit's really hit the fan, but then that's too late. So it's a real problem. And I think there's obviously some training required, but I think there's a fundamental something. People have either got it or they haven't. I'm sure PJ will say you can train people or teach people to get better at it or improve. But I do think there's a problem, and I think that the UK business, I don't know whether that's a general worldwide problem, but changing people's mindset is really difficult.
It's definitely global. The work I do, just to add my perspective, the work I do in this space is hugely about the emotional element of change. And there was a study done not so long ago, and it's for a consumer product study, but it concluded that 95% of all decisions are emotional. And so it came back, and I could wax lyrical about brain structures and anthropology and evolutionary psychology and how that influences how we as humans operate. But really, what it comes down to is people aren't necessarily afraid of change; they're afraid of loss, and that can be loss of status, loss of security, loss of comfort, loss of power, loss of influence. But it's usually security. That's the fundamental human driver. It's that safety side. Do I feel safe or not? Maslow's hierarchy needs and all that. And so when people hear change or get told change, they hear loss. And so that's one of the biggest challenges that line managers are, in my experience, certainly at a middle layer, a CEO or ELT -2, -3, -4, where they really struggle is that they've been struggling hard to build their careers, and someone says we're going to change something, it's taken as a threat, and their stress mechanism kicks in, and they go to the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. And so the biggest issue is actually how you reduce that reaction, that automated reaction, and get them much more open to this idea of change actually is about continuity. And it sounds like a paradox, and it is part of the paradox of change. In that change actually drives continuity, because if you're afraid of loss, then how do you focus on the things that keep stability for you by making you want to change things to deliver that stability? And I'll get off my soapbox in a second, but that's certainly my perspective of why culture is so important within this wider mix of leadership and of strategy. Is if you have a culture that enables people to embrace that, it becomes so much easier to be able to learn and to grow and to be agile and actually spend less time leading, right? That's the goal, I think, for any senior leader, is to spend less time dealing with people and more time working on the business. And the culture should be able to do that. Sorry, long-winded answer there for you, Raoul, but hopefully helpful. Any other comments on this from anyone? Again, away from the culture side, but in terms of developing that, I suppose, the directional strategies and leadership capability, are there any pitfalls or opportunities that you see?
I'd just like to say that I think this all comes down to something that you mentioned before, company culture. I've worked in different size companies. I worked at really big international companies. That's how I met PJ. And I got fed up, so I set up my own businesses. And then I've gone on to work with different size businesses. But I think one of the things that I'm seeing more and more nowadays, even with really large scale companies, is this ability to act more nimbly and have more of a startup culture within their organization. I think this kind of culture that's been ingrained into large successful businesses has made them move like dinosaurs. And in this really fast changing environment that everyone finds themselves in, especially now with the prevalence of AI, everyone has to kind of move at lightning speed. And in order to do so, you need to think and act like a startup. And that kind of fosters, in some cases, the ability to work more closely with your team members, to delegate more responsibility, to kind of diffuse the level of responsibility that a team leader or a department head holds themselves. And that is helpful. But I think until more companies kind of start behaving in this way, it's going to be more and more difficult for people to lead people in a positive way.
Yeah, I think obviously I'm going to agree with you because that's where I've dedicated my career. And I think there is so much there that is true, that what you said is absolutely spot on. There are downsides, I have to say, though, to a startup culture. Having worked with plenty of startups, you get the flip side of the leadership maturity or immaturity, I should say, and you get the lack of resources, which means it's really difficult to invest in the things that are actually really important. But on the whole, you're absolutely spot on in terms of getting that part of it right. But I'm interested to invite other comments. Neil, Dan, Raoul, is there anything that you've seen that you feel like, in terms of this, again, back to directional strategies, where they're a little bit more like this chess game, is there anything where you feel that there's a key focus for leaders to really invest in to make their businesses, let's say, more agile, but more competitive? Neil, you're on mute if you're talking there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking measurement, the implication on having a more of a directional approach might have on, you know, a somewhat of a sort of corporate obsession with measurement.
Yep.
So, I mean, that adds, right, to the kind of admin time and the non, you know, productive time that I think people are complaining about. So, you know, do we need to sort of redefine, rethink, you know, what to measure? I love leading and lagging indicators, but more so indicators that focus on, you know, input metrics, right, than necessarily output metrics. Output metrics kind of take care of themselves, right?
Yeah.
Revenue, sales, market share. But if you really understand what are the key sort of input metrics, right, the kind of, you know, the people you know, that we have as part of the team, the you know, the sort of the product quality, the, you know, the way in which we are, you know, successfully engaging and delighting our clients. You know, I think there's so I just wondered if directional strategies suit more of those important qualitative measurement KPIs. I mean, you to handle that type of approach, you've got to be quite confident as a business, right? I mean, the less confident you are of a business, the more you fret over
Trusting.
You know, the kind of the metrics that are somewhat out of your control.
Yeah.
The metrics that are in your control, it's good to focus on them. And so I wonder if directional leadership, right, is you know, potentially something that might, you know, kind of better suit the right type of measurement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Raoul, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've got a book of KPIs I've just tagged up, so that's gone in the bin. No, and I'm in that phase of I don't run the business anymore. I don't have any hands-on management of the business, but it is terrifying. And I'm wondering whether I should need lots of KPIs to make sure I sleep at night, you know, to make sure I'm happy. But the reality is, Neil's absolutely right, that they're generally margin, profit, loss, you know, stuff that's already happened. You look in a month behind, it's very rarely do you get a measure for what's about to happen or things that are going to happen. And I'm comfortable with that because I probably know that in my head, and I probably do that without someone writing a report for me. But what I don't have is that the information of what's happened like I used to have, and that's slightly terrifying. So we are obsessed about measures, and I do think that's a massive burden for middle management, and all they do is spend time working out how to get their KPI right for the MD or the chairman or whatever. So it's finding some balance between the two, but the directional strategy piece I think is really important, and actually something I think that's maybe we do it as a startup, as I think Davina was saying, that we lose it somewhere in the growth of the business. No one ever told us it was directional strategy. You just do what you do, don't you? So I'd like to somehow see a system that allows you to, I don't know, measure it. I don't know how you measure it, quantify it or teach it. But yeah, I think there's the lessons there somewhere.
Well, it's something definitely worth exploring. I think I think we'd all agree that. I mean, I think there's that, was it analysis paralysis, where you get reams and reams of data, and then what the bloody hell does it all mean? And you get
no one reads any rate. Yeah, it's
exactly
horrendous. Yeah,
but at the same time, you need to know the reality, right? There was someone who pulled an analogy, which is with the UK economy, which is You don't listen to economists on the UK economy because they'll tell you what happened and then have 27 different versions of why. What you do is you look at markets, because markets will tell you what's about to happen if you've got the right sort of signals, if you're dialing into the right signals. So it feels like there's a comparable analogy to drive here, which is you need to be able to be watching the right sort of market signals or strategic signals so you can do something about it, rather than reporting what's already happened when it's too late to do anything about it anyway. Okay, brilliant. I'm mindful of time. I am told to talk about the next time on Leadership Lab. PJ, I presume it's going to be PJ, is going to be talking about hurdles to delivering the strategy, the vision, or the mission. Notice he didn't say purpose there, so I'll have to get involved in that one and have a chat with them about it. But I think that's it. I think you all know PJ, so you probably don't need his email address to book in a one-to-one. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been here already. But I think then this last little bit is for us to network if we want, ask any other questions that anyone wants to raise or make any points that anyone wants to raise.
If certain members of the team come sort of hop in and hop out of some of these sessions, because not everyone's going to be able to do all of them,
right?
Will there be some information? Will the slides be available or something that we could perhaps send to other members?
The short answer is, I don't know. The longer answer is, this is being recorded as a session. And so I'm quite sure that PJ will either make that available to individuals or be able to talk to, or at least get the core elements out and available. So I'm sure anything is possible, as it were. I'm just going to stop presenting.
Lovely.
There we go. But PJ will be the one to answer that. I'm afraid I don't want to.
No, that's fine. Very helpful, Gavin. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Anyone else? Any other questions? Any other points that people want to talk about or raise before I let you go back to your lovely summer lunchtime?
No, all good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, lovely to meet you all. Davina just had to dash off, but lovely to meet all of you. Dan, lovely to see you again. It's been a while. And hopefully I will see you on one of these things in the not too distant future where I'm not facilitating and making it up as I go along.
You did a great job.
No, well done.
Really well done. Thank you.
Take care, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Nice to meet you. Bye.